My name is Ramiro. I'm 56 years old, and what I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. I was born in 1968 in a humble house near Lake in Veracruz. My mother, Doña Carmen, was a devout Catholic, the kind who never missed a Mass at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish. My father, Don Refugio, was a quiet, hard-working countryman, but I only understood years later what he was hiding from the family. My childhood was normal, up to a point. I had a best friend named Tono. We played marbles on Tierra Street, we fished for tilapia in the lake, climbed the mango trees in the yard. It was a simple life, a typical country boy's life, without many worries. But when I turned 7, things started to change in a way I didn't understand. I began to see shadows in the yard, mainly at night. I would wake up in the middle of the night and stand there staring into the darkness, talking to myself. My mother thought it was sleepwalking. She would carry me back to bed and whisper a Hail Mary in my ear, but deep down, I could see in her eyes that something was wrong with me. One night, Tono stayed over. We stayed up late telling ghost stories, like kids do. I don't remember what happened, but he told me the next day that I sat up in bed in the middle of the night with my eyes open, speaking in a language he'd never heard before. He was so scared he couldn't even scream. After that night, Tono never wanted to be around me again. At school, he started saying I was weird, that there was something wrong with me. The other kids distanced themselves too. I spent recess alone, not understanding why my best friend had turned his back on me. That hurt more than anything I had ever felt before. When I was 9, something happened that marked my family. It was a Wednesday morning. I was having breakfast with my mother, and out of nowhere, a phrase slipped out of my mouth that I hadn't planned to say. I looked at her and calmly told her that my grandmother, Refugio, was going to die on Sunday. She dropped her coffee cup on the floor. The liquid spilled everywhere, and she told me to be quiet and never say that again. That night, I woke up to go to the bathroom and heard a sound coming from my parents' room. It was my mother crying, kneeling on the floor, praying the rosary in a desperate voice. I heard her begging God to protect her son, not to let him go down the wrong path. I stood in the dark hallway, listening to that prayer, not quite understanding what was happening. The following Sunday, my grandmother died of a heart attack, exactly as I had said. My mother looked at me at the wake with a mixture of fear and sadness that I will never forget. But my father reacted differently. He looked at me with a strange gleam in his eyes, as if he had discovered a hidden treasure. It was the first time he seemed proud of me. My father had a brother named Crescencio, who lived on the other side of the lake, further inland. They saw he was a witch recognized throughout the Tlaxcala region. People came from far away to look for him for jobs and cleaning. Every time he visited our house, he asked to be alone with me. He said that I had the gift open, that it needed to be prepared. My mother forbade these conversations. She got nervous. She sent her brother-in-law home early. But what my mother didn't know was that my father had started secretly taking me to visit Uncle Crescencio. He said that we were only going fishing, that it was a man's outing. But on the way we always passed by the witch's house, and it was on those visits that I began to understand that my life was never going to be normal, that there was something much bigger waiting for me and that I had no choice in the matter. My father died when I was 14 years old. They found him drowned in Lake Catemaco, near Monkey Island. They said it was an accident, that he fell off the boat while fishing alone at dawn, but I always had my doubts. At the wake, while my mother was crying non-stop, Uncle Crescencio approached me and whispered in my ear that my father had left him a request, that he was going to take care of me because I was special. After my father died, our situation became difficult. My mother had no education. She worked washing other people's clothes and making tamales to sell, and the money was barely enough to eat. I tried to help as I could. I ran errands at the market. I carried sacks, but it wasn't enough. The house began to fall apart. We were in real need. A year later, when I was 15, Uncle Crescencio appeared with a proposal. He said he could take me to live with him in the mountains, that he was going to teach me a trade, that I was going to have a better life. My mother resisted at first. She cried. She said she didn't want to lose me. but hunger spoke louder, and in the end she accepted. In the first week at my uncle's house, I realized that there was nothing normal about that story. Uncle Crescencio sat me at his altar one Thursday night and told me a truth that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. He told me that my father had made a pact before I was born, that he offered his first male child in exchange for land and prosperity. I wanted to believe that it was a lie, that my uncle had gone crazy, but he continued speaking, explaining that misfortunes, the deaths of two of my cousins, weren't coincidences, they were payments for spiritual debts within the family, and my father's death was also part of that settling of accounts. I already belonged to them from my mother's womb. Uncle Crescencio told me I had two options: I could serve willingly and have power, money, everything I wanted, or I could resist and be devoured little by little, like what happened to my father. There was no middle ground, no escape. The entities already knew me, had already marked me, and were just waiting for the right moment. The first ritual was scheduled for a Friday at midnight at a crossroads on a dirt road near White Monkey Hill. On the way, walking in the dark with my uncle, I suddenly stopped, my legs locked. I saw my mother's face in my mind. I heard her voice praying the rosary that night. Years before, I felt like running, like going back to Catemaco and begging for forgiveness. My uncle noticed I had stopped, without turning around. He asked me if I was afraid. I answered him, my voice trembling, that I didn't know if I wanted this. He finally looked at me, and I swear his eyes were different, darker, more sunken, as if something else were looking right through them. He told me that if I didn't go willingly, they would come looking for me anyway, and it wasn't going to be pretty. I kept walking. At the crossroads, I lit 7 black candles, poured mezcal on the ground, and repeated words I didn't understand. When I finished, I felt a chill creeping up my legs, even though it was a hot Veracruz night, and then I heard a deep voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The voice said only one word: I accept. From that night on, I never slept peacefully again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows moving, and every time I looked in a mirror, I saw my mother's face begging for forgiveness, an apology I no longer deserved. I had made my decision, albeit under pressure, and there was no going back. What I didn't know was that it was only the beginning of a much deeper descent into darkness. After that night at the crossroads, I discovered I had a knack for spiritual work. The entities responded quickly when I called upon them. The rituals worked with a power that impressed even my uncle. Within a few months, I was already seeing people who came from other towns seeking help. The fame of Don Crescencio's nephew began to spread throughout the Tuxtlas region. At 20, I decided to leave Veracruz and seek new horizons. I went to Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, a large city where no one knew me. I rented a small room in the Independencia neighborhood and began seeing clients in secret. Word spread quickly among the people who sought those kinds of services. In 2 years, I had my own house in the Mitras neighborhood, bought with cash. My clients were all sorts of people: business owners who wanted to ruin the competition, women who wanted to bind husbands, politicians who wanted to win elections. Even a police commander once sought me out for protection against his enemies. Money came easily, and I grew accustomed to a life I never imagined having after leaving that poor town in Veracruz. It was during this time that I met Don Severiano, an older sorcerer who became my mentor in Monterrey. He was a man of about 65, originally from Zacatecas, who smoked cigars constantly and whose eyes were always bloodshot, as if he never slept. He taught me things my uncle didn't know: heavier spells, death spells, rituals to destroy entire families, ways to drive my clients' enemies mad. I once asked Don Severiano if there weren't consequences for doing these things. He took a long drag on his cigar, slowly exhaled the smoke, and told me that each of those jobs came at a price from me. He also said that I wouldn't see it at the time, but that I was paying. I laughed in his face. I thought it was just old talk. I was making money, I had respect. People trembled when they heard my name. What price was that? I thought. In 1998 a businessman from San Pedro Garza Garcia showed up at my house. The man was desperate. He told me that a partner had betrayed him, had stolen clients from him and was destroying his business. He wanted me to resolve the situation. I asked him how much he would pay and he replied, "Whatever necessary." We closed the deal for 150,000 pesos, half up front, half when it worked. I did the job on a Tuesday during a waning moon. 3 weeks later, the partner's wife died in an accident on the highway to Saltillo. The son was arrested with drugs at a party, and the man had a stroke that left him paralyzed on his left side. The businessman returned, terrified, with the rest of the money, threw the bills on my table, and ran out without looking back. I was left alone in my workroom counting the money and realized I was smiling. It wasn't joy or happiness, it was satisfaction, the same satisfaction of a job well done. That night I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My eyes seemed darker, more sunken. They looked like my Uncle Crescencio's eyes that night on the way to the crossroads. I looked away and didn't look at myself in the mirror again for a long time. In 2001, a woman from Guadalajara offered me 200,000 pesos to do a spell against her stepdaughter. The girl was 9 years old. The woman wanted the child gone so her husband could be left alone with her children. I looked at that woman, saw the evil in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I said no. I didn't say anything about children. She insisted, increased the amount, begged me, and I pushed her out of my house. That night, one of the entities appeared in my dream. It was furious. It circled me, screaming that I didn't choose anything, that they were the ones who chose. I woke up at 3 a.m., with 3 bleeding scratches on my chest, but I didn't back down. It was the only thread of humanity I still had, fragile, almost invisible, but it existed. It was also around that time that I met Lucero. She came to my house asking for help to bind her husband, who was seeing another woman. I looked at her and decided I wanted her for myself. I broke up her marriage with a spell and took her as my wife. We had 2 children, Adrian and Montserrat. Lucero knew what I was doing. She saw people coming and going. She heard the singing in the early morning, but pretended not to know, and I pretended that we were a normal family. The price Don Severiano had warned me about began to arrive slowly, almost without me noticing. First came the nightmares. Every night I dreamed I was in a dark place, surrounded by faceless figures who asked me for things I didn't understand. I would wake up sweating, my heart racing, and I couldn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. Then came the chest pains. It was a strange pressure, as if someone were squeezing my heart from the inside. I went to doctors, had all kinds of tests done, and nothing ever came up. The results were always normal, but the pain wouldn't go away. I started losing weight for no reason. I lost almost 12 kilograms in a few months. People said I was wasting away, but the worst part wasn't what was happening to me, it was what started happening inside my house. One night in 2006, my daughter Montserrat, who was 10 years old, woke up to get a drink of water. She walked through the hallway and saw my bedroom door open. She looked inside. I was sitting on the bed with my back to the door, not moving, and behind me was a tall shadow shaped like a black goat standing on 2 legs, with 2 red dots where its eyes should be, leaning over me as if it were whispering something in my ear. Montserrat screamed so loudly that she woke the neighbors. When I turned around, there was nothing there, but my daughter was trembling in the hallway, white as a sheet, pointing toward the room and crying that she had seen a monster, that she had seen the monster. Lucero ran downstairs and hugged the girl. She looked at me with a rage I had never seen before and asked me what I had brought into this house. I said there was nothing there, that it was just a child's imagination, that Montserrat must have had a nightmare, but Lucero knew it was a lie. From that night on, she started sleeping with a Bible under her pillow. Montserrat never slept well again. She started wetting the bed. She cried for no reason. She was afraid to be alone in any room of the house. In 2007, I tried to do something to protect my family. I called upon the entities that had always obeyed me and asked them for protection for Lucero and my children. I performed the entire ritual. I offered everything they asked for, and nothing happened. I called again, louder, with more offerings. but there was total silence. On the third try, I heard a low, mocking laugh and a voice telling me that they were already theirs too, that I had given my family away when I married Lucero. Inside that workshop, my son Adrian suffered the most. At 16, we found him passed out in his room, showing signs of an overdose. The ambulance rushed him to the hospital. He spent 3 days in intensive care. At the police station, when he went to give his statement, he confessed that he had been using cocaine for 2 years. I tried to hug my son, to tell him that I was going to help him get out of that life. Adrian looked me in the eyes and said something that shattered me inside. He told me that he was afraid of me, that he had always been afraid of me. Montserrat found a different way out. At 14, a school friend took her to a service at a Christian church in the neighborhood. My daughter converted that same day. She arrived at the house a different person, with a peace in her eyes that I had never seen before. A week later, she packed her bags and went to live with my mother in Veracruz. She didn't say goodbye to me. Lucero held on until 2010. She had started drinking. Hidden, I would find empty bottles in the closets. One ordinary day, she simply packed her bags while I was working in the workshop. When I went upstairs, I only found a note on the bed. It just said that she couldn't stand what was in that house anymore. She left without leaving an address. Don Severiano died in 2008. They found his body in his house 4 days later, already decomposed. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide open, mouth open as if he was screaming. The police said it was a heart attack, but when I saw that body in the coffin, I understood that it wasn't a heart attack, and I thought to myself that I was going to die the same way, alone, terrified, paying the price for everything I did. After Lucero left, I completely sank. I spent my days drinking, barely attending to the clients who still came. I let my workshop fall to pieces. The money I had saved was gone quickly. I spent it on tequila and futile attempts to forget the life I had built for myself. By 2015, I had been living alone for 5 years in a house that felt more like a tomb. October 19, 2015 started off strangely from the moment I woke up. I opened the front door in the morning to get the newspaper and found a dead bird in the entryway. It was a mockingbird lying on its back, its eyes open. There wasn't a cat in the neighborhood that could have done that. I kicked the body aside and tried not to think, but a chill ran down my spine. In the afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered and only heard static, that screeching sound of a TV with no signal. I hung up. It rang again, just static. The third time I answered amidst all that noise, I heard a low, distant, but clear laugh, a laugh I knew from my worst nightmares. I threw the phone against the wall so hard it shattered. I tried to calm down. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that I was going crazy from drinking so much, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I opened a bottle of tequila and downed half in one gulp, then I opened another. I wanted to turn off. I wanted to sleep and not dream about anything. I lay down on the couch in the living room with the television on with some random program and I fell asleep. I woke up at 3 in the morning. I saw the exact time on the clock on the wall before I felt the pain. It was like a hand entered my chest and squeezed my heart with all its might. It wasn't like the pains I felt before. This was different. It was final. I knew I was dying. I tried to get up from the couch to grab the phone, but my legs wouldn't obey. I fell face first to the floor. I hit my forehead on the corner of the coffee table. I felt the blood running down my forehead, but the pain in my heart was so strong that it didn't matter. I stayed there on the floor looking at the ceiling fan that was spinning slower and slower. I thought about my children. I thought about Adrian who was afraid of me. I thought of Montserrat, who left without saying goodbye. I thought about Lucero, that I stole from another man and destroyed his life. I thought about my mother, who prayed for me every night, even though I hadn't visited her in years. I thought I was going to die alone in the darkness, on the cold floor like Don Severiano died. The fan was spinning slower, or maybe it was my eyesight that was failing. The edges of my field of vision began to darken, as if someone was slowly closing a curtain. The sound of the television was disappearing. remaining far away until it became complete silence. I was leaving. The last thing I heard before everything shut down didn't come from the TV, it was laughter, the same laugh from the phone, the same laugh from my nightmares, only now it was there inside my ear, like someone was lying next to me, whispering to me, a low, hoarse, satisfied laugh, as if he had been waiting for that moment for a long time. Then everything went black, completely black, and I was absolutely certain that he had died. What I didn't know was that death was just the beginning and that what awaited me on the other side was worse than anything I had imagined in my 40 years serving darkness. I woke up standing, but I was no longer in my living room. I was nowhere that I knew. It was an endless hallway with wet stone walls that seemed to pulse as if they were alive. An orange light, faint like the embers of nearly extinguished coal, came from somewhere I couldn't identify. The smell was unbearable. Sulfur mixed with rotten meat. I started walking without knowing where I was going. My feet were bare and the floor was freezing, but I couldn't stop. It was as if something was pulling me forward, forcing me to keep going. The more I walked, the more I heard sounds coming from the walls, low moans, stifled cries, screams that seemed to have been swallowed before they could be fully released. I tried to run. My legs moved in slow motion, as if the air were too thick. As if I were trying to run through water. Panic rose in my throat and I wanted to scream, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. I was mute in that place, completely powerless. I passed through an opening in the wall and saw a scene that will be forever etched in my memory. Dozens of people were kneeling on the floor with thick chains on their wrists. Dark figures walked hunched over among them, whispering things into the ears of those souls. People wept and writhed in pain. But they couldn't get up, they couldn't escape. It was then that I recognized a face in the middle of that crowd. My blood ran cold. It was Severiano. My mentor was there among the chained ones, thin as a skeleton, his skin clinging to his bones, his eyes empty of any hope. He saw me too. He raised his head slowly, with effort, and looked at me. Don Severiano didn't say a word. He just shook his head from side to side in a small, slow, desperate movement. It was a warning, it was a confirmation. Everything he had told me about the price to pay was true, and there he was, paying it. I wanted to run to him, I wanted to ask him how to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't obey me. One of the shadowy figures walking among the chained ones stopped suddenly. He turned what should have been his face in my direction. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a dense darkness shaped like a head. But I felt it was smiling. I sensed the creature's satisfaction like a scent in the air. The creature began to come toward me. I tried to run again. I tried to move in any direction, but it was useless. My body no longer belonged to me there. I was trapped, immobile, waiting for that shadow to reach me. Every step it took made the air colder, heavier. When the creature came close to me, it stopped. It stared at me with that emptiness where it should have had a face. Then it opened what seemed to be a mouth, a dark slit in the middle of all the darkness, and said a single word in a voice that seemed to come from inside my own head. "You've arrived," was all it said. "You've arrived," and I understood that I was in the place where I had sent so many people during 25 years of working for evil. I had arrived in hell, and from what I could see around me, there was no way out. The creature didn't touch me, it didn't need to. I simply began to be pulled forward, as if invisible hands were dragging me all over my body. I passed through corridors, through openings in the walls, through places I couldn't see clearly because the darkness was too dense. The screams around me grew louder, more desperate. I ended up in an immense space, like a giant hall of black stone. The ceiling didn't exist. When I looked up, I saw only infinite darkness, a void that seemed to have no end. The cold there was unbearable, much worse than in the hallways. My bones ached, my teeth chattered, my whole body trembled. In the center of that room stood a throne. It was made of black, gleaming stone, as if wet, and upon it sat something I can't quite describe to this day. It was large, much larger than any man, and from that thing emanated an even more intense cold. It wasn't heat, as I always imagined hell to be. It was a cold that burned from the inside out. I tried to look at that creature on the throne, but every time my eyes tried to focus, they burned as if acid had been poured on them. I had to look away, at the floor, to the sides. But even though I couldn't see clearly, I felt its size, I felt its power, I felt the pure evil that emanated from that being like ripples in the air. The voice that came from that throne wasn't a single voice, but several voices together, some male, some female, some child's, all speaking at once in a disturbing harmony. They said my full name, Ramiro, son of the refuge, a servant since before I was born, and asked if I knew why I was there. I wanted to answer, wanted to say that I didn't want this, that I was forced, that my father sold me before I was born, but my mouth remained silent. In that place, I had no right to defend myself, only to listen. The creature continued speaking with all those voices. It said that I had done its work for 25 years, that I had destroyed marriages, driven men to madness, taken the lives of innocents every soul I touched. They had collected, and then the creature leaned forward on the throne, and the smell of death became so strong that I almost vomited. The creature said it knew everything, even what I hid from myself. She asked me if I remembered the woman from Tampico in 2003, not the mother who wanted to kill her stepdaughter, the other one, the one who came begging me to undo a spell that had been cast on her. She offered to pay double, triple, whatever I wanted, and I laughed in her face and sent her packing. I did remember. I had buried that memory deep in my mind. The woman died 2 months later. They said it was suicide, that she jumped off a bridge in Tampico, but I was the one who killed her when I refused to help her. The creature on the throne knew, it knew everything I had done and everything I hadn't done. There was no way to lie there. I looked at the floor of the hall and saw faces, dozens of faces staring at me from inside the black stone. The businessman from San Pedro who was paralyzed, the woman from Tampico who killed herself, others I didn't even remember, all looking at me, but it wasn't hatred in their eyes, it was sadness, a deep sadness of someone who knows there's no hope left for anyone there. The creature on the throne stood up. It was even bigger than before that I had imagined, a gigantic shadow that seemed to swallow what little light existed in that place. The voices that came from it grew louder, more united, and said that I belonged to them now, that my sentence was decided, that I would stay there forever, like all the others I had helped to command. I felt my body begin to sink into the floor. The black stone was swallowing me, rising through my feet, my legs. I tried to move, I tried to scream, but I remained paralyzed and mute. I looked to one side and saw that I was going to remain like those faces on the floor, trapped there for eternity, watching the new souls arrive without being able to do anything. It was at that moment that something happened that I did not expect. A light appeared. It wasn't strong at first. It was like a crack, a small fissure in the ceiling of infinite darkness, but it grew, it opened, and a clarity I had never seen began to invade that room. The creature on the throne reacted, for the first time since I had arrived there. It seemed disturbed. The voices emanating from it became disorganized, shouting different words at once. It raised what appeared to be arms toward the light and shouted a single word with all the voices together. No, the light grew stronger. It took the form of a figure I couldn't see clearly because it was too bright. It was like staring at the sun. My eyes ached, but this time it wasn't a bad pain. It was a pain that brought peace along with it. I felt a calm I hadn't felt since I was a child, since before it all began. The figure of light spoke. The voice was clear, simple, unlike any of the voices I had heard in that place. It held no malice, no confusion, no pain. It was just a calm voice that said a short phrase, "This is not yours yet." A prayer was uttered. I understood in that moment what that meant, without anyone explaining it to me. I knew. My mother, Doña Carmen, 77 years old, was kneeling in her room in Catemaco at that very moment. She had woken up at 3 a.m., with a knot in her chest and had begun to pray the rosary for me. The same prayer she had said every night for more than 25 years. The creature on the throne screamed again, a sound I felt in my bones that made the entire room tremble. The faces on the floor began to move, shadowy figures ran in all directions. It was as if the whole place was in a panic because of that light, that presence that had invaded its territory. The black stone that was swallowing me stopped rising, it began to descend, to release me. I felt my body being pulled 36 hours 59 minutes. Upwards, towards the light. Away from that hall, from that throne, from all those screams. The last thing I heard before everything disappeared was the clear voice speaking again, "Go away and never return to this place." That's what the voice said. And then the light enveloped me completely and I felt a peace I have no words to describe. It was like my mother's hug when I was a child and afraid of thunder. It was as if everything was going to be all right, even though after everything I did, I woke up with tubes in my nose and arm. The light was white, strong, and it took me a few seconds to understand where I was. It was a hospital room, an intensive care unit with machines beeping beside me. A nurse was standing with her back to me, arranging something on a table. When she turned around and saw that my eyes were open, she dropped what she was holding. Her name was Margarita. She was the first person I saw when I returned to the world of the living. She ran to call the doctor and within minutes, a whole team was gathered around my bed. They all stared at me as if I were a ghost, and in a way, I was, because according to what they told me later, I shouldn't have been there. Nurse Margarita explained everything. My neighbor, Doña Esperanza, had heard the sound of my fall at 3 a.m. and called an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, I had no pulse. They performed CPR for 6 minutes until my heart started beating again. The doctor said it was a miracle I was alive, and an even bigger miracle that I was awake and speaking normally. I stayed in that hospital for 12 days. I cried every day. I cried in the morning, I cried in the afternoon, I cried at night. The nurses thought it was because of the trauma, because of the fear of having almost died, but it wasn't that. I cried because I had seen where I was going. I cried because I knew I didn't deserve to have come back. On the third night in the hospital, I woke up at 3 a.m. The room was dark, only the light from the machines flickering, and in the corner of the room, near the door, there was a shadow standing watching me, the same kind of shadow I had seen all my life, that I had served for 25 years. It was there waiting. I felt fear rise through my body. I wanted to scream, I wanted to call for the nurse, but my voice caught. Then, for the first time since I was 9 years old, I did something I had forgotten how to do. I prayed, with a trembling voice. I said, "God, if you exist, help me." Simple words, no memorized prayer, no ritual, nothing I knew. The shadow didn't move at first, it just stood there watching me from that dark corner, but then it began to slowly diminish, like smoke dissipating in the air. In less than a minute it had completely disappeared. The room felt lighter, the air became easier to breathe. I cried until the sun came up that morning. On the 10th day of my hospitalization, the hospital phone rang. It was a politician from Tampico whom I knew from the old days. He told me he knew about my health problem and was glad I had improved. Then he got straight to the point. He needed a job urgently and was paying 500,000 pesos. He said I could do it from the hospital, that he would send everything I needed. I held that phone for a long time. 500,000 pesos. It was enough to pay off all my debts, to start over, to get out of the hole I was in. My hand was trembling, my heart was racing. I heard the voice of there. The other end was asking if I was still on the line. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and hung up the phone without saying anything. Then I cried again, but this time it was relief. I asked Nurse Margarita to dial a number I knew by heart. It was my mother's phone number. When Doña Carmen answered and heard my voice, she was silent for a few seconds. Then she said something that made me cry once more. She said she knew that God had woken her up that night, that she had asked him to bring me back. 25 years of prayer every night, and that morning the prayer was answered. When I was discharged from the hospital, I went back to my house in Monterrey to pick up my things. I stood at the door and couldn't get in. My stomach churned, my legs gave way, and I vomited right there on the sidewalk. That house was steeped in everything I had done for decades. Music. There was no way I could set foot in there anymore. I went to sleep at Donia's house. Esperanza, the neighbor who had saved my life. The next day I looked for a Christian church in the neighborhood. I asked to speak with the pastor. His name was Isaiah, a simple man of about 45 who listened to me tell everything without interrupting me once. When I finished, he didn't run away or look at me with disgust. He just told me that God had already forgiven me the moment I asked and that now we were going to cleanse my past. Pastor Isaiah came with me to the house. We went inside together. I showed him where I kept everything, the ritual objects, the clothes, the black candles, the books. There were 4 boxes full of 25 years of work for evil. We took them to a vacant lot at the end of the street. We poured gasoline on them and set them on fire. While those things were burning, I heard sounds, whispers, squeaks, something that sounded like crying mixed with rage. It came from inside the fire, or maybe it came from my head. I don't know. Pastor Isaiah prayed harder with a hand on my shoulder and the sounds faded away until they disappeared completely. When the boxes turned to ash, music, I felt a weight lift from my back. I sold the house a month later. Music, I never went back to that neighborhood. I moved to Catco. I went to live with my mother. Donia Carmen welcomed me as if I were the prodigal son from the Bible. She didn't ask me anything, didn't charge me anything, she just hugged me and told me the room was ready. There was a picture of Jesus Christ on the wall and a Bible on the nightstand. The first few months were difficult. I had nightmares every night. I would wake up with scratches on my body that I couldn't explain. Objects would fall on their own in the house. Doors would slam shut even when there was no wind. One night, all the light bulbs exploded at the same time, leaving my mother and me in darkness. She didn't scream or run, she just started praying aloud and I prayed along with her. The attacks lessened over time until they stopped completely. In 2016, I learned that my uncle Crescencio had died. They found him alone in his house in the mountains. His body had been there for days. No one went to the funeral. I wasn't there either, but I prayed for him. He initiated me into evil, but before becoming an instrument of darkness, he was also a victim. Someone initiated him too. It was the first time I could look at the past without only feeling hatred. In 2017, my daughter Montserrat came to visit me. She didn't believe I had truly changed. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. We spent an entire afternoon talking in the hallway of my mother's house. I asked her forgiveness for everything, for the fear I caused, for the childhood I stole from her, for the goat-shaped shadow she saw in the room when she was 10 years old. She cried. I cried. The day I began to win my daughter back. With Adrian it was more difficult. My son struggled with addiction until 2019. The reconciliation happened during a church mission trip to build houses in a poor community in Oaxaca. He showed up unannounced, grabbed a shovel, and started working beside me without saying a word. We worked all morning in silence. In the end, he said just one sentence. He told me he was trying. I replied that I was too. Today, he's been clean for 5 years. My mother died in 2020 at 82. She was asleep in the early morning with her hand in mine. The last words she said to me before closing her eyes that night were that it had been worth the wait. 25 years of praying for me every night, and she saw her son return to God before she passed away. I buried my mother with the certainty that I would see her again one day, but not in that dark place. Today, I'm 56 and live in Catco, in a simple house near the lake. I'm a deacon at the church where I converted. Once a month, I travel to cities and towns sharing my testimony. I don't charge anything. I don't accept offerings. It's the least I can do. When people ask me if I'm afraid to tell this story, I tell them I was afraid of dying without telling it. What I saw in those 6 minutes is something no one should ever have to go to, and if my story makes one person think twice before going down that road, then every word has been worth it.